good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to The Future is Female. This is the show where we find the extraordinary in every woman. Now, cardiovascular diseases are the leading cause of death in Malaysia, claiming over 23% of lives each year. Alarmingly, women bear a disproportionately heavy burden. 44.5% of Malaysian women have elevated cholesterol, which is a key risk for heart disease, compared to just 32% of men. And even more troubling is the trend is younger onset these days. Malaysians experiencing cardiovascular events a full decade earlier than their counterparts in developed nations. So is it time for us to rethink how we approach heart health for women in Malaysia? To mark the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, I'm delighted to introduce to you my guest today, Dr Sophia Rasheeqa Ismail, who is the head of the Cardiovascular Unit at the Institute of Medical Research under the National Institutes of Health Malaysia. She's also the recipient of the prestigious 2017 Merdeka Award grant for international attachment. Welcome to the show, Dr. Sophia.
Hi, Melisa.
Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
You have such an interesting career path and such an illustrious CV. Can we talk a little bit about your journey? At the start of your career, what led you to pursue a career in medicine and in medical research, and specifically in cardiology?
Okay. I've been working since 2010. So towards the end of my medical school years, at that point in time, I wanted to do endocrine. We had actually gone to Southampton to visit a family member. My uncle was actually a consultant endocrinologist at the University Hospital. So looking into his passion, into research, into endocrine, and it triggered my interest in doing endocrinology after that. So once I graduated, I applied for a position for housemanship. So after you graduate, you have to do complete housemanship for 2 years. And I applied for housemanship in Hospital Putrajaya, which is the leading referral center for endocrinology in Malaysia. I was lucky enough to start with medical posting. And under the medical posting, I went up to the head of department and asked, okay, I want to do research, but I don't know what I want to do. Please guide me. So at that point in time, it was Datuk Zanaria, who was the head of department. She guided me to Dr. Masni, who is still working in Putrajaya at this point in time, for my first research. I did research in medical school, but that was kacang putih. So this was my first research I did on my own. Despite the busy schedules, the rotations, during housemanship, I was able to present my data during my third posting as a houseman. Unfortunately, it didn't go as well as planned. I think there was a lot of methodological issues, a lot of issues with how I collected data, how I analyzed data, which got me really sad at the end of the day. But then it triggered the need of, okay, I need to study more. I need to do more in order to
improve it.
Exactly. So, but then working and studying are two different things. So I only realized that endocrine was not for me at that point in time. So once I completed my housemanship, I actually was posted in a district clinic under the district of Kuala Pilah. It was then that I discovered public health. So public health is, to me, a bigger picture. It takes a bigger lens of medicine. Clinicians, as you may know, they treat the person in front of them. So whatever efforts they do, whatever interventions they do, however they treat, it affects the person in front of them. Public health physicians, as you may well be aware, during the pandemic, took the big headline, a big task of managing their population's needs. So it was at that point in time that I wanted to do my master's in London. I did my first master's in public health in London School of Hygiene, and it was after that that it nurtured my research skills and then my desire to do more research. I was lucky enough when I came back to Malaysia, so I'm still a government servant, so I came back to report for duty, and the best question that was asked to me at that point in time of my career, what do you like to do?
Wow,
that is a
blank
bonus. So I love research. I love research as something that I want to do, and I was suggested to go to Institute for Medical Research, where I have been for almost 10 years.
Okay, so tell me what you do there. Tell us a little bit about your research.
So since I started research in IMR, Institute for Medical Research, I embarked into cardiovascular research. In medicine, we have the saying that sometimes you don't choose your specializations, your specialization chooses you. So we were lucky enough that my head of center was granted a large grant by the British government for the Merdeka study, so which is a large nationwide study in collaboration with the University of Cambridge that looked into the risks of first heart attack among Malaysians. We recruited 5,000 participants throughout Malaysia within the span of 2 years for that. So when I started working with my boss, with the team members for the Merdeka study, that was when I learned that, okay, cardiovascular diseases is a big thing. It's been #1 cause of death, with the exception of pandemic, in the Malaysians for over 2 decades. But there's not enough that's being done at the epidemiological side, meaning at the population level side. There are a lot of clinical trials that's been done by clinicians in terms of treatment, but then we need to understand more before it happens. So that's why that comes from my public health background to that. So,
okay. Can you talk to me about how your research translates into public health policies?
Okay, so in order for any research to be translated into public health policies, there's a long journey to it. With what we've been trying to do is, by following Merdeka study, is to discover biomarkers, the risk factors first. Okay. So we collect participants, we collect Malaysians with a unique characteristics, and we see what defines them to have the disease and what doesn't define them to have the disease. So once we discover what risk factors they have, then we can see what treatment can work, or what kind of risk factors what kind of clinical tools that we can play around with. So eventually, my research goal would be to be able to find the right clinical tool or find the right treatment intervention for the right person at the right time. So that, in terms of public health, that's very important.
Can you talk about how that relates to the work that My Genome is doing?
Okay, so My Genome is a national project. It's a collaborative project between Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation, MOSTI, and the Ministry of Health. So Ministry of Health, we are tasked to recruit Malaysians. At this point last year, we were able to recruit 1,800 healthy Malaysians within 3 months. And this year, we'll be going further throughout the country. We'll be going to Sabah, Sarawak, and we'll be targeting Orang Asli as well. We are not leaving anyone behind. Right. So with My Genome, we are moving towards advancing precision medicine in Malaysia. So precision medicine is something that is emerging in the healthcare world, in medicine throughout the world. It is where we don't take one size fits all into everything. We know that even with Caucasians, rambut dah different color.
Yes, yes.
Facial expressions
is
different.
Yeah.
So even though we've had a lot of studies, guidelines are in place because of large multi-center studies, but at the end of the day, what really fits you? What really fits the local population? So that is something that we are planning to move towards. Okay. But before we have something that's targeted to the Malaysian population, we need to understand first what makes our Malaysian population unique. So that's why the first current phase of My Genome is we are basically doing a baseline, just a basic reference panel, just to see, okay, Malaysians, Malay, Chinese, Indian, all of you, what do you normally have before we can compare with those with disease. So going back to what I am studying, so in terms of cardiovascular research, so this information will be important, as one of the goals that we are trying to aim is to develop a more precise, more refined clinical tool to predict whether or not you will have your heart disease, at what age, or even complications of heart disease.
Where does the gender lens come in? So when I think of heart disease, I often see it as men's disease, essentially, yes. Right? But we know that that's not true, because it affects women too, sometimes more than we realize, because symptoms present differently, treatments are different. How do we put a gender lens on to your research and your work?
So it's a great question. So typically, when we evaluate someone's risk of having heart disease, we do, one of the common ones that we use is Framingham risk score. Framingham risk score is of course based on the Framingham population, which is in the US. So genetic-wise, it's very different. But then again, it doesn't take account the differences that we have genetically as Malaysians, and also our unique risk factors. As you've clearly mentioned earlier on, that even in terms of diabetes, cholesterol, women have different prevalences. They have different risk factors, and those clinical tools do not take that into consideration. So what we're trying to do is to merge everything together. So not just have your basic information, whether you have diabetes, hypertension, your gender, but also have your genetic information in it as well, and some other factors to ensure that when we have a prediction for you, it will be more accurate to you at your age.
There's also the hormonal health that comes into play. I mean, I think of menopausal women and the higher risk of cardiovascular disease. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So women tend to get heart disease later in life because of the reduction of estrogen, progesterone, all that risk factors. One of the reasons why cholesterol is a bit high in women is because of estrogen. So the moment it goes down, our bad cholesterols will go up. And when our bad cholesterol goes up, then the tendency of having more blocked blood vessels and a higher chance of a heart attack.
Okay, so how do you see the landscape in terms of how we are assessing cardiovascular disease in the wider population? Are there the right tools? Do we have the right information? Where are the gaps in the data and our practice of it? So
we have some tools that are in place, but with any tools, it needs to be, its robustness is with the data. So in order to have a reliable tool, reliable treatment strategies, you need to have enough data to support it. So studies in Malaysia might not, there are some researchers, some groups of researchers who are doing good studies for the local population, but then they don't really have the numbers. So that's where we come in, IMR comes in, that's how My Genome comes in order to support this research when we have the bigger number. Okay. So in order for us to have a more robust, a more reliable outcome that can be used for the population.
How have you personally evolved in terms of your research? So if I may go back to 2017 when you first won the grant, and then 2018 when you were you had your 3 months in Cambridge to further your research. From that point on, and you think about how your research has evolved, talk to me about the changes, yourself personally as a medical researcher, but also our understanding and our sophistication when it comes to medical research now, particularly for cardiovascular diseases.
Okay. So for me personally, when I entered IMR, I was fresh from a clinical background. Mm-hmm. So IMR is the leading biomedical research institute in Malaysia, so which means that we do a lot of lab stuff. Yes. So for a clinician who doesn't stay in the lab, it's very new knowledge for us. So when I applied for the Merdeka Award grant for international attachment, I wanted to learn not just the basics, but the entire procedure of how to do the lipid analysis that I did in Cambridge from beginning to the end. I was very fortunate to have a very supportive mentor when I was in Cambridge, who guided from the basics, how to hold the basic instruments, how to manage it, which was, to me, it's a stepping stone for me into biomedical research. So I've been very thankful for the grant for the attachment, which also provided collaborations. I'm still working with the team members from Cambridge, especially from Albert Coleman's team members, even for my lipid studies at this point in time. So it's been 7 years maybe from the attachment, but I've still learned a lot, and that has evolved my interest in doing more biomedical research.
What's the most challenging aspect of medical research? I mean, you can only speak for yourself, but for you, what did you find most challenging?
Medical research, if we talk about biomedical research, can be very broad. Coming from a clinical point of view, it can be foreign science to us. So, but learning the basics on how things go to a deeper level is very beneficial. Like what I'm doing right now is moving towards more genetic work. Okay. So I look into DNAs, genetic studies, which has a lot of background knowledge to it. But it's a lot of learning. It's a steep learning curve. But in terms of the future prospects for it, I believe that my clinical background complements what I'm currently learning, what I'm currently progressing in biomedical research.
So is that the trend that you see in terms of what emerging technologies or emerging methodologies or trends that you see when it comes to cardiovascular research? Is this the future?
Yes, definitely. In any research, it has to be multidisciplinary. Especially in cardiovascular diseases. Cardiovascular disease is a complex disorder. So meaning it's not like cancer where there's most likely there's one gene that causes a cancer. Mm-hmm. Cardiovascular disease has so many factors that affects it. So you can't be working alone just to look at, okay, I'm just looking at cardiovascular genes and that's it. No, you have to look at those contributing to diabetes, lifestyle. So you need to work with nutritionists, you need to work with a lot of other people. So in order to have a very comprehensive treatment and intervention plan.
What is Malaysia's role in terms of where we're at in global cardiology research? Are we at the forefront? Are we keeping up to with what's developing worldwide?
In terms of clinical research, I believe that we are maybe not in the forefront, but we are there at par with a lot of developed countries. The team in Sarawak, headed by Dr. Alan Fong, and also there's also the team in Sabah as well. They are doing a lot of clinical trials, which is very important for cardiovascular treatments and so on. In terms of what the government or what we are trying to do as compared to the other nations, we are trying to collaborate more. IMR, so my team, we are collaborating with Singapore, from the Cadence team in particular, who we might be similar but we're different, but the three major ethnicities are still the same. So in that sense, we might still be able to combine our knowledge, learn from each other, and to come up with, as I've mentioned earlier, more data, more robust, more reliable results. So we are working with Singapore to hopefully have a multi-ethnic collaboration.
What a great regional collaboration.
Yes, yeah.
For you personally, Dr. Sophia, can I ask you what your primary research goals would be moving forward? I mean, are there still questions about cardiovascular diseases that you are curious to answer?
Definitely. So for me, my current research goal is to develop tools that will be able to predict either likelihood of first heart attack or even worsening of heart attack.
Likelihood of first heart attack?
Yes.
Okay.
In a more refined way, combining genetics, combining your risk of diseases, your personal traits, whether your gender and your ethnicity.
That's exciting.
Yes,
and because we are looking at, women who are really pushing boundaries when it comes to science, particularly because of International Day for Women and Girls in Science, I want to ask you where you see the role of women evolving in medical research here in Malaysia. I mean, are there unspoken challenges that women face in this industry, and are there things that you'd like to see shift? It's a big question.
It's a big question. I come from a government background, so in government service, there's a lot more women actually in research. Okay. So there's no gender bias.
Fantastic.
But then again, I can't say much about in the universities and outside. But then again, research itself in Malaysia is challenging. We don't get enough funds. There's not enough funding to go around. So when there's not enough funding to do research, then you can't do big research. So then you are only either expecting or hoping for international grants, which require a lot of expertise, a lot of, which actually depends on your affiliations as well. So that will be more challenging, but then it would be more beneficial for research in general. In terms of future of women in research in Malaysia, I see a bright a future for us. I think women or girls in general, there are a lot more girls in STEM nowadays.
Great, yeah.
But those doing research, I personally prefer women.
Is there a reason?
I'm not being gender biased, but in terms of meticulation, doing research, you need to be a bit more meticulous, and it's a long journey. So what you have in plan now might only be in fruition in 5 years' time. So it might not work for everybody, but then that is something that as researchers we need to plan ahead and be patient about, and there'll be setbacks in between, but it's something that is really something to look forward to at the end of the day.
You mentioned earlier in our conversation a couple of doctors who helped guide you along the way. How do you view mentorship in that sense, if I may use that term? The experience of having someone older and more experienced to help someone along the way, you know, kind of help open doors for someone, clear the path ahead. How do you see that? Is that necessary and important for particularly women in this field?
In research, I think that is very important. Okay. Coming from school, you know what you have to do. At the end of standard 6, you go to Form 1, then you have to sit for SPM, then you know what you're supposed to do.
We know the pathway, yes.
But then once you start working and in research, what is there to do? So I've been thankful. I've been very lucky to have several mentors that have guided me along the way. My first mentor that helped me in my writing skills as a researcher was one from Cambridge. So he was one of the collaborators that we have for the Merdeka study. He gave me the opportunity to write. He corrected my writing, which I have much appreciated along the way. I still have Professor Lai Naiming, who is the Dean of Medical School in Taylor's. He has been my long-time mentor and still a wonderful colleague to work with, who has guided me on a different path, but still in research, but on a different path, required for research as well. And now my current project leader, Dr. Ratna Matripin, she has showed me what it's like to be a good female leader. I've not had the opportunity to work with many female leaders, directly under female leaders in research, but with the My Genome project, which she is one of the project leaders, it's a good change. I'm not undermining men in research. There are wonderful men researchers, but to have a female leader as herself is refreshing. And because women in general, people say, oh, women can't be leaders. That's the gender bias. Women tend to have to be a bit more of an emotional decision maker or micromanagers. So, but how she works is a bit different. So I can work well with her, and I see, I've learned a lot of things by being with her. And I hope that this mentorship will continue until I progress to the next stage of my research.
This is why representation is so important. When you can see, you know, a good example of what it means to be a leader represented by a woman, it encourages us to also be in that mold. And when you are, if you could give advice to other young women who are thinking about wanting to be in this field, and knowing what you know now, what would you say to yourself as well when you were first starting out? Do you have any advice to give to young women today?
Okay, I think there'll be like 4 things that I would that comes to my mind. First is to believe in yourself. You can't reach, even if it's research or non-research, in anything that you do, you can't achieve if you do not believe in yourself. Secondly, it's mentorship. Mentorship in research is very important because it's not a path that is so direct. So you need mentors to guide you along the ways. You don't need to be spoon-fed. You just need mentors to guide you and show
a helping hand.
Exactly. Thirdly, it's resilience. Resilience in research is very, very important because things will never go your way. Even in simple research, sometimes there'll be setbacks. But then with any good outcomes, resilience and believing in yourself would, inshallah, have a beneficial outcome. And I think lastly would be, I think, education. So education is important. Women, I think we are learning, we are in postgraduate studies, it's very good, but to have the right education from the right universities will also make a difference in terms of your career for research.
Dr. Sophia, thank you so much for being
You're
on the show
welcome.
with me today. What a pleasure it's been talking to you. I
pleasure.
appreciate you sharing your experience with us. And before I end the show today, I'd like to mention that the 10th edition of the Merdeka Award Grant for International Attachment is now open until the end of April, until the 1st of May. And if you have a research project or a study plan that aligns with the mission of the Merdeka Award, I would encourage you to apply at the grant application website. So that's all for this episode of The Future is Female. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.